Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our next episode of our podcast series for the Chesapeake Film Festival. We are super excited, me in particular, to have our guest today, Ted Adams. Now, Ted is quite literally a jack of all trades. I am unbelievably impressed, not only by his accomplishments, but how humble he is. I have learned so much from Ted over the years. He's a very respected and esteemed board member of ours, and not to mention, filmmaker, writer, entrepreneur. I mean, the list goes on. So we're going to be learning a lot from Ted today. And Ted, I am just so grateful for your time today. Thank you for joining us so much. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Irene. Again, my name is Ted Adams. I'm a entrepreneur and filmmaker and engineer who lives in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax, Virginia. I run a I run an engineering company. That's what pays my bills. But my passion is definitely in filmmaking and writing and do a lot of philanthropic work and just trying to uplift our community in many different ways.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ted. Really appreciate that wonderful intro. So I had a couple questions I'd like to start with. I think our viewers would really find your background just so interesting. Can you kind of talk to us, kind of maybe pinpoint one or two areas of your work that has been pivotal throughout your life, and maybe talk about how you got started? How did you get started more in the on the artistic side of things?
So my background is in engineering. I went to Rice University down in Houston, Texas, because I had aspirations of becoming an astronaut of all things. So I went to Rice, and when I did more research on it, in fact, I was going to go to the Naval Academy in your backyard, Irene, because I
Yeah.
wanted to be an astronaut. But
Wow.
as I studied engineering, and I loved engineering, don't get me wrong, I found out that if I did reach my goal of being an astronaut, the choice of becoming an actual astronaut and actually going into space was completely out of my hands. I mean, this is back in the days when there was no Jeff Bezos is around building their own personal rocket ships. So the idea of having some politicians decide my fate and future, that didn't really sit well with me. So I did go on to get my private pilot's license, and I flew when I was in college, since I was in college. But but from my father was an entrepreneur. He started his company back in 1970, Unified Industries, and so having him as a mentor throughout my life um, really spurred me on to not just only follow my dreams, but understanding what he did, saw the influence he had on our society in general. I mean, he was a maverick when it comes to minority business and women-owned businesses and helping uplift a whole lot of folks, just by saying, this is a good idea, let's get it done. And when I watched him work with people like Walter Fauntleroy and Parham Mitchell and all these, John Lewis, these people would come to my house and I would listen to them tell the history of the United States. But what I really got out of it was the fearlessness of them saying, this is the right thing to do. Let's just do it. And don't ask for permission. Just get it done. So that kind of stayed with me my whole life. So when I went to Rice and I went to UCLA for my MBA, and I went to the Chinese University of Hong Kong and studied Chinese and Asian business practices, and I got exposure to different cultures and different ways of doing things. That engineering background was really fortified me to say, if I'm going to get into whether it's real estate development or making films or writing books or doing anything, it gave me a kind of a roadmap of how to look at a situation and break it down into segments so you can actually get things done and accomplished and bring in the right resources to make things happen. But also understand the fundamentals. And then in reality, when it comes to films, story is number one. I mean, if you look at the top 10 things, stories 1 through 6. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And then people overlook some of the other basic fundamentals, which you can appreciate, Irene, is people overlook sound. Being a judge on a film festival and having my films judged, that people will forgive something that's out of focus, but they will not forgive bad sound. So you have to look at those fundamentals and say, yeah, those things are important, and you got to make those things as perfect as you can, and always try to be the best in class, whatever that class is.
That's wonderful advice. I'm sitting here soaking up that advice. I'm literally like a sponge right now listening to you. So thank you so much for that. And I love those words. Don't ask for permission. If this feels right, get it done. Can you talk about how you have implemented that practice when you're making films? And also, I would love to talk about your book a little bit later too. So
Sure.
just in your, all of your projects that you do, the creative projects? How does that come into play?
Well, the thing is, I mean, technology's had a huge change. When my son was an intern for Stan Lee back in the late 2000, let's say 2009-ish time frame. He was in high school. In fact, he was Stan's first high school intern, and I was invited to go to a San Diego Comic-Con. So again, hanging out with a guy like Stan Lee and seeing what he's been able to accomplish, again, it told me that anything's possible. I will never be a Stan Lee. There will never be another Stan Lee, and that's okay because he was a unique person in and of himself. But he would always say that his films would never have gotten made the way they are unless technology finally caught up. I mean, you're probably not old enough to remember the old Spider-Man not TV shows, but films that they tried to make back in the 70s. They were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
They were good stories, but they would
Mm-hmm.
just you would laugh at the technology and what they tried to do. But when when Sony came out and did the first Spider-Man, he said they finally caught up to his vision of what it would actually look like on screen. So when it comes to my storytelling, of course, I learned a lot from him as far as making sure I focused on story and connecting with making sure the characters connected with the audience. Um, I knew that first of all, again, in engineering, surround myself with the best people I can possibly get on my team. If I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. So always surround yourself with smart people, but also say here's a roadmap to success, and also say if I'm going to write a story, I write a story. It's nice to say I'm going to write a story that's got no limits. That's fine, but it probably will never get made as a film. But if you say I'm going to write a story with these parameters, I can actually shoot this film in my house, in
Mm-hmm.
my background, in my backyard. For example, the movie Try, that was about a triathlon. I literally, my house represented, I think, 6 houses in the film because it went to different
Wow.
rooms and you just edit the right way or you set it
Yeah.
up the right way. And then our actors were in 3 actual triathlons because I knew that these triathlons were going to be scheduled, so I got them registered. When all the people who signed up to do the actual race, when they signed in to be an extra for the film. Now, the way they did it was the triathlon organizers. They said you can opt out from being in the film, and we put a red, yellow band on your arm. We make sure you weren't in the final cut, but nobody opted out. So we literally had 4,000 extras in our film, and it didn't cost me anything extra to pay these people. Again, everybody was very enthusiastic. So if I know what I'm dealing with, I can try to make the most of what I have. And then if you can write stories that you can connect with, like you mentioned Tyndall Typewriters, I was one of my COVID phases. I actually collected and rebuilt typewriters. So this is one of the ones from the film. It's
Amazing.
one of the original folding typewriters, or we call laptop computers back.
For beauty.
But it's one of those things where I'm very good at fixing typewriters. But more importantly, I knew a story that would relate to a lot of people when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to telling stories and running it to other fields like cooking and things of that nature. So when I look at a film, I think in terms of it as I'm writing it. How am I going to make the
Mm-hmm.
film, and is it possible to make it? And if it requires somebody to fly an F-16 into a battle scene, that's fine. But that's just another film I'm going to write, understanding that I can't make the final decision if I'm going to shoot that film or not.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the, I would say, most influential films or some of your favorites that you have made? We've had a couple of your films in the festival, in the Chesapeake Film Festival. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of Try. If you wouldn't mind talking to us about Try and Tyndall Typewriters and anything else, just about what stood out in those films, what worked, maybe what didn't, what challenges did you face? I think a lot of people listening to this are storytellers in and of their own right, and would love to hear about your experiences, not just the successes, but the struggles, because those are also very real.
The biggest struggle in most films is going to be financial. Unless you have a
Yeah.
bankroll of money, you gotta either change your tune of how you're going to get the film made, or think about what kind of budget you can work within to make the film happen. But
Hmm.
I'll tell you a funny story about the auditions for Try. Kimberly
Hmm.
Skirm was our casting director. She's also on that Chesapeake Film Festival board. And before that, she was one of the casting directors for House of Cards. So she really knows her stuff when it comes to finding people. So when we actually did the auditions for Try, now you're talking about you have to be able to bike, swim, and run to be in a triathlon, right? And we told the actors you're going to be biking, swimming, and running. And this is no joke because we're going to put you in an actual race, which is going to be in the
Yeah.
Potomac River. So you don't want to touch the bottom of the Potomac River. That's a really bad day.
Oh,
So so thankfully Kimberly was at she had a place in Baltimore where we did the auditions, and they happen to have a pool on site, right?
oh, great.
So my son and I said, okay, look, I'm a certified triathlon coach, okay? So I said, look, I told the actors there's going to be a swim test. So because I don't want you to drown, and if you can't swim, tell me, and we'll work with it. But I learned very quickly that actors, they really want to get that gig, so they will say anything to get that gig. Okay, so we had quite a few actors that signed up for the lead role, and they said they could swim. And so sure enough, we did a swim test. They couldn't swim 20 yards, not even 20 yards. They couldn't swim 10 yards without touching the bottom. They'd start swimming. They kind of start hopping down the pool as if that was going to
Oh,
fake me out or something. And I'm like,
oh,
it's not
yeah.
about me. You're gonna not just you're gonna disrupt the race because the lifeguards
Yeah.
are now going to focus on you and take away from these thousands of other people who are actually participating who don't care about our film. Okay, so a lot of folks got disqualified immediately because they couldn't bike. I mean, they couldn't swim. And then it came down to bikers. You know, I would you would assume that people know how to ride a bike if they're going to be in a movie about
Yeah.
biking. And I would get on these we'd be on set, and I'm not even joking. I'm not even making this up. It was at like 5 o'clock in the morning. I had one of my actors,
Wow.
and we were gonna. I said, well, let me just because sometimes you get on a new 10-speed bike, sometimes you can't
Mm.
change the gears the same way because they move around, but the brakes are pretty much in the same spot. And I'm not even joking. We are now coasting down the parking lot, and she said to me, "Ted, where are the brakes?" And I'm looking at
Oh
her
my
going,
gosh.
I, to,
You're
in about
joking.
20 minutes, you're going to be in a group of writers, and you're asking me where the brakes are. That's the kind of thing that just completely throws you off guard because you're thinking, how could you possibly get into this situation and put everybody else in this peril? So
Yeah.
preparing your team, and you know, I had to give lessons to folks. We train constantly on how to be prepared to be in a film like this. So that's one thing on try. But for the other stories, the ones that really the movie Othello-san, that was in the Chesapeake. It's
Mm.
also on available on YouTube now. So Othello-San. So when my son was studying Japanese in Japan, and he was trying to get some acting gigs while he was over there. So he actually was, you know, studying and then trying to audition, and he was getting turned down. And it was because his language wasn't quite there yet, and that's fine, completely understandable. So my wife's is Filipino, so I got half black, half African American actor that's trying to get these gigs in Japan. So he got frustrated, and I said, "Look, here's what you should do when you want to get start in the film industry, make your own film, be your own producer, right?" So I said,
Yep.
why don't we write a story that can be shot in one room, and then you can invite people to be part of your story. That'll bring the community to you. So sure enough, I said, I'll tell you what. We were texting literally back and forth, and it turned into a screenplay of Othello-san. I wrote it in one afternoon. In fact, it was on Valentine's Day. I'll never forget that.
Wow.
And then it went on to win a bunch of festival awards for best screenplay. And then his visa ran out, so we came back to Virginia, and we shot the whole film in one room in George Mason University. And
My
it went really,
gosh.
really well. In fact, it got into an Oscar nominated film festival. Um,
That's incredible.
yeah, so things can happen, but again, I worked within the parameters I had. I brought in the
Yeah.
best casting directors I could bring in, and then I brought in
Mm.
the best actors I could afford, and it worked out really
Amazing.
well.
Thank you for those stories. Boy, I could like sit here talk to you for hours. I mean, just hearing about Othello-san, like I feel like that was just a happy accident. Like that was
It
unplanned.
was totally
How it
unplanned, and the good thing is
wow.
it was shot half the film was in Japanese, and it was very difficult to find. It's so funny because there's one scene in the film where my son's performing Shakespeare in Japanese, right?
Uh-huh.
So he's performing Shakespeare, and he's doing the best he can, and he starts to break down, right? And then the teacher in the school, he holds up his hand and says stop, and they basically just rips him a new a-hole for not having been prepared for
Mm.
this class. So after the film, people would say to me, I would say to him, "How did you were amazing in your acting and how you were able to make it look so real to like start chopping up your words." And he said, "That wasn't an act. I really ran out of gas." He did the best he could, but he couldn't get any further because he just was stumbling along. So it worked out. Yeah, again, use the gifts you have that you're presented with to your advantage.
Yeah, very, very good advice. I want to say I'd like to plug Othello-san. I've seen the movie at least twice, I think. It's so powerful. I love watching it. It's beautifully done. Your son has an amazing camera presence, and I just like looking at him
Oh, I'll let him
and
know.
watching him perform. He has a very powerful presence. So where can people find that film?
It's actually on YouTube at this point. It's still on Amazon Prime, but it's definitely on YouTube as well for free. So you can look at both Try and Othello-san are now available. And Tyndall Typewriters is also on YouTube right now. And then so yeah, I'm really excited about what we're doing at the Chesapeake Film Festival. And I will say that having my films to be part of the festival has expanded my filmmaking career and exuberance, because I got to work with people like yourself and the other people that are in the festival who love films, who love creating, who love empowering, and it's always a joy to be part of this festival. The best thing about my experience at the Chesapeake Film Festival is actually being there in person and getting to see the city of Easton. It's an amazing town, and everybody's extremely welcoming. So that in and of itself is a destination that people should go to be part of this whole program.
Ted. I know one of the things that we've tried to do this year with you being on the board, this, we're really marketing the festival as a destination festival because as much as it is about the festival, it's more so about our community. You come to Easton and you feel like you're part of the community. There's amazing restaurants, shops, things to do. There's a great energy. It's just a very supportive place to be, and it really is a destination. So it's sort of like a win-win. So yeah, no, thank you for saying that.
My nickname was
Um,
Mayberry North when I first got there.
that's right. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Well, we have a little bit more time. I'd like to dive into a couple of your films. Try, in particular, can you talk about your role in Try? And that was all locally shot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I came up with the idea on the story for Try. Then I worked
Okay.
with another writer to do the initial screenplay. And then later on, we brought in a director named Jay Jameson, who was recommended to me by Russell Williams, who's the first African American to win 2 Oscars. And he was a teacher at American University, and I was looking for a
Yep.
director, and he said, "Well, here's Jay." So I talked to Jay, and he agreed to make our film. This is actually his first feature film, and
Wow.
Kimberly Skirm again. She was our casting director. But when Jay got on set, and not set, but we started working together, he asked if he could make a few changes on the screenplay, and I said sure, because I'm pretty much open to that. That was the first screenplay I'd ever worked on. So it basically became a page one rewrite. So which is fine.
Mm.
One thing about being a filmmaker is you've got to be humble and not if you got someone who has a better idea. If it doesn't change the story, fine, go with it. And Jay had a lot of ideas that were better than what we had originally drafted up. So I was fine with that. And then again, my job then became more of a producer, because I was a producer of the film. My job was to empower Jay to give him everything he needed to make the best film he could make as the director. And it's funny, the first day I met Jay, I will say this. I said, Jay, I will say that Jay's gone on to do. He's a writer director of Superman and Lois. So he's done extremely well with his career. But his first job, I actually gave him his first job as a paid director. I said, Jay, I'm telling you right now, do not mess with the actors. And he laughed and he goes, I said, no, I'm not kidding, because they're not going to sue you. They're going to sue me. I'm the producer. You're the director. And no one remember who the producers are. They always remember who the director is. But the producers take all the
True.
risks. And he goes, okay, fair enough. And he didn't. So God bless him for listening to me. But
That's
but again, that was a
really
real
nice.
trial by fire, and it was a very expensive education. But I did learn a lot from it, and I took those lessons to heart, and I try not to repeat those mistakes I've made. But it was one of those things where you learn what to do and what not to do. I probably should have done it on a smaller film to start with, but my ambitions were pretty high, because actually before Try, I was working on a film called Fight for Old DC about the Washington Redskins, and it was about a lot of people don't know this story, but the Redskins, and I'll say the Redskins, they were the Redskins at the time. They were the last team in professional sports to integrate, and
I didn't
yeah,
know that.
George Preston Marshall was one of the biggest employers in the D.C. area other than the federal government. And his adage was, Washington will the official colors for the Washington Redskins was gold, no, burgundy and Caucasian. That was his thing. Now understand that George Preston Marshall, to make this put this thing into perspective, the Redskins were the team of the South. So they were the
Mm.
furthest team south in the NFL. So his whole market was segregated. So he had no real, except for being a good person, he had no business motivation to integrate the his team, because he would be basically in
Mm.
his vernacular would be slapping the face of all of his customers. So that was his justification for taking that stance. But it took John F. Kennedy to integrate the Washington Redskins. That's what happened. So my first screenplay was actually around that, and as I was doing that, I was getting frustrated. And I said, you know what? Let me write another screenplay about something that I'm more comfortable with, which became Try, and that's how that got started.
I hear that you are you have a book out, a new book,
Mhm.
and we're going to be. I think we have an event coming up. Is it during the festival, or it's happening in Easton, right? Is there a
Yeah.
book signing?
So I wrote a book. It's called "The Man Who Owned a Plane,"
Oh, look at
and
that!
it's a short book, but it's basically a tale of a person who um, finds unexpected wisdom in the aftermath of a loss. So he's going to go see his friend who's lost his father, and he comes away learning more about himself and about the gifts that our friends and family who have passed on give us, that have nothing to do with material goods. And so that's what the
Wow.
story is about. So it really helps you cope with these things, but also recognize that the gifts that you really have, that you work with throughout your life. But I'm going to be doing a book signing, hopefully, on in September, probably September 18th, right before a film festival screening for the Chesapeake Film Festival. I think we're going to be screening Wyeth that day, and I'm hoping to do something at the Flying Cloud bookstore in Easton. So
That's
so
right.
hopefully we're going to get that worked out. But yeah, I'm really excited about that book, and I'm hoping people take a look at that and take it to heart and help people get through some tough times, but also be inspired by what they see in themselves.
You're totally a motivational speaker. That's another thing you need to add to your resume. I mean, you just have such a breadth of knowledge and experience. And I so appreciate your directness in this podcast. I appreciate how honest you are. I think that only helps people, in their own experiences, especially people who are writing stories, making films, So thank you so much for your time today. This has been fascinating. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or add before I give a little information on the festival?
No, no. I mean, again, for me, I try to make films and tell stories that do three things: entertain, inspire, and motivate. Because you want people to get out there and do something, and I would encourage people to not be afraid of telling your story. One of my favorite poems of all time. It's not even a poem. It's a speech. Was Teddy Roosevelt's "The Man in the Arena," and I look at that
Mm,
constantly. Only, especially when I'm going to put a story out, because you're going to
mhm.
hear critics and haters, and that's fine. That's just part of it. But when people go to film festivals, or apply to film festivals, you are going to get rejections. That's just part of it. But you can't
Right.
take it to heart, because if you've been part of a festival, you understand that it's a matter of fit. And sometimes your film can be a phenomenal film, but it doesn't fit what the festival is looking for. Don't let that
Right.
discourage you from telling your story and making your film, or writing your book. Get out there and do it. Take your licks. Make that part of your character building steps in your life, and just keep moving on.
Thank you so much, Ted. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Ted Adams has said it first. Make your film, don't apologize for it. Get out there and do it if it feels right, and keep on moving ahead.
Right on.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much,
My
Ted.
pleasure.
Well, I'm going to plug the festival here. So I'd like to remind everyone to visit our website, ChesapeakeFilmFestival.com, for all festival information. Starting in early August, you'll be able to go onto our website and purchase tickets. Please reach out to us with any questions or inquiries at info@ChesapeakeFilmFestival.com, and of course on our website. I'd like to plug our opening film. We have a really special feature animation that was nominated for an Academy Award called Loving Vincent. This is the first time in our 18-year festival history that we're opening with an animation. And I want to share these words that came directly from Sid Collins Walker, our executive director, who chose this film very purposefully and with a lot of attention for our opening day film. So she wants to continue to drive home the importance of supporting artists and the arts, which recently has taken quite a hit. Artists of all kinds, painters, performers, writers, etc. It is imperative that we support their visibility and we continue to lift up the arts community, both far and wide. And this film, Loving Vincent, does exactly that. It's beautifully orchestrated and will really set the tone for the festival this year, which runs from Friday, October 10th to Sunday, October 12th. We are so incredibly humbled and excited to have this film in our festival. So please stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for tuning in today. Really appreciate it. See you all soon.